What's up, everybody? Welcome to Inside Bama Recruiting, a part of the Bama Standard Network. As you guys can see here, I got my main man and senior recruiting analyst, Dan James, on here with me, the fourth. Appreciate you getting on here with me, Dan.
Oh, always a pleasure, Jonathan.
All right, guys, we got some an interesting topic to talk about here today. We're talking about the possibility of, the number 2 linebacker in the nation decommitting from USC and now possibly heading over to Bama. We're talking about Xavier Griffin. Real quick, I'm going to give you guys some basic information, and then I'll pass this over to Dan real quick. Like I said, he is the number 2 linebacker in the nation according to On3. Stands at 6'3", 205 pounds, out of Gainesville, Georgia. Like I said, he did decommit from USC, and he will be taking official visits to Ohio State May 30th, Alabama June 6th, Texas June 13th, and Florida State June 15th. And by the way, I don't think it's a real coincidence that Alabama moved Jordan Edmonds' official visit from the 13th to the 6th, right? So just so happens that's going to be when Griffin is there. But either way, Dan, let me know what you think about Xavier Griffin decommitting from USC and the possibility of him landing in Tuscaloosa.
Well, man, I think it was only a matter of time. Alabama stayed on them. They continued to build relationships, and really that's all that recruiting is about now. You know what I'm saying? It's about, I talk about it all the time. Recruits now, they're going to commit to a school really based on 3 things now, and that is NIL, proximity to home, and the number 1 thing is relationships. They got to feel comfortable with you. The parents got to sign off, and, Alabama, Courtney Morgan, they've done an outstanding job of doing that, getting kids on, staying after going out to see them, getting on the road, getting out on the recruiting trail. And this is just, Alabama reaping the rewards. They stayed on the guys. I don't expect him to be the only guy that they could, that's currently was committed to another school that they can be able to flip, but just because they're so diligent in their pursuit of their top prospects. So it's not a coincidence. He was firm. He really was firm to USC, and I know there's a running joke that guys commit early to USC only for them to lose them. But yeah, he was firm. He was dead set on USC, but Alabama really stayed on it. Stayed on them. And it's starting to pay off.
No doubt. Shout out to Christian Robinson, the Alabama linebacker coach, who consistently stayed at that dude's front door. They said Christian Robinson was a consistent just man going out there to visit Xavier Griffin, his family. Even when he was committed to USC, Alabama was very persistent on getting this guy to flip. They really love what they see in him and all that stuff going forward here. But let's get more into the details here of why Xavier Griffin can come over to Alabama. We're talking about the Alabama ties. Look, anytime you have ties to Alabama, we like that, right? They can possibly come into the advantage here. We're talking about his head coach. We're talking about, I believe his name's Josh Niblett.
Yes.
Exactly. Is his head coach over in Gainesville. And he has a teammate as well, Jamarian Matthews, who's committed to Alabama. So if you want to speak on the possibility of, that having an effect on him choosing possibly Alabama after this decommitment.
Oh, definitely. Once again, we talk about relationships. They're not only teammates, they AAU, and they are very familiar with each other. They were, middle school, elementary school friends, and he's originally from the state of Alabama, and he came over to Gainesville under Josh Niblett. Jamarian Matthews, originally from Alabama, played last year at Sparkman and Harvest, Harvest and Sparkman, we got him over to Gainesville, and it's still about relationships, and he's been doing it too. You have to give your hats off to Jamarian Matthews. He was talking in his ear as well. So there's a lot of Alabama ties, and that's why there's a lot of things the team pointing to Alabama at this time.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly things can turn. Like when Saban was at Alabama, if there's one thing we knew, that no player was safe that was not committed to Alabama. The last second flips that happened and all that stuff, the turmoil was just consistently created. And it seems like under Kalen DeBoer, especially with Courtney Morgan, this is going to be a consistent thing to expect out of this. But yes, Griffin did actually, like you said, from Alabama, did grow up an Alabama fan. By the way, he did admit that in an On3 article. And to me, one of the biggest comps I saw, which is not just from 24/7 Sports, but a multitude of other sites here, they comp him exactly to Jihad Campbell. And I'm like, man, to have a comp to Jihad, you know what I mean? And if Jihad just stayed a little bit healthier, the dude would have probably been a top 20, top 15 pick. We know that he was a special player. And just to be comped against him, it's crazy. And as of right now, 24/7 Sports did put out their first crystal ball today, giving Xavier Griffin to Alabama. So, and of course, we try not to look too much into that. But either way, any last words on Xavier Griffin before we get off here?
Yeah, I like the Jihad Campbell comp because coming out of IMG, Jihad Campbell, you know, he was kind of projected as edge as well.
Yep.
You know, and he eventually moved inside, and that's the same type of guy that I see with Xavier Griffin. You know, he can play the wolf. He can play anywhere in, you know, on the second level, and tremendous athlete. You know, he can fly off the edge. You can move him around just like you could Jihad Campbell. You know, in passing situations, you can run him off the edge. You know, so it's a very, you know, I'll say likable, you know, player comp.
Yeah, and when you look at the class so far we have put together, you know, if we end up getting, we're going to say we get Xavier Griffin and then we end up with Tank Jones, right? So we're talking about the possibility of having one of the best duos at the linebacker position we've had in years. Look, I love Deontay Lawson. In my opinion, he never had a chance to reach his full potential, just like a lot of these guys that get injured and they can never reach that next level, right? We had a rash of injuries at the linebacker position for the past couple of years. So when you think about the possibility of that, and then you pair up Jordan Edmonds, right, opposite side of Dijon Lee, Ivan Taylor as safety, all this stuff, Draker Patrick Jr., you know what I mean? Like, it just seems like it's all coming together for this Alabama defensive staff. And of all the things that were criticized last year, folks, it was the Alabama defense everybody was pointing at. They were pointing at Kane Womack. They were pointing at that staff. You know what I mean? Linguists and all those dudes saying, what are you doing? And now it looks like, well, it could be one of the strengths, if not the strength of the Alabama football team moving forward is the defense. Crazy thing to think about. Any last words before we get off?
Yeah, they're digging in, you know, they're, you know, nobody's safe, like you said. But as far as Tank Jones, I don't know if he'll end up at the linebacker position. You know, the guy's 6'4", 250 pounds right now. You know, you could go either way. You know what I'm saying? You can get him on campus. You can beef him up, put him at the Bandit, you know. And that's where I think he'll eventually end up, you know, Bandit, you know. So, and we have a lot of targets, and, you know, a lot of our top targets are on the board, you know. So it's going to be a very, very eventful summer for Alabama, I expect.
No doubt. So, in the name a couple of those targets: Anthony Tank Jones, Kamari Brooks, Xavier Griffin, Jaquez Wilkes, Kevin KJ Ford, Nick Abrams, Anthony Davidson, Siri Johnson, who, by the way, I think there's a good chance here, Caden Hall, and Braden Rouse, just to name a few on the big board for Alabama that's possibly coming to Tuscaloosa. So, it's looking really bright for Alabama. But either way, thank you for getting on here, Dan. Always a pleasure. Please leave in the comments below, everybody, what you guys think about this. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Do we get Xavier Griffin in Tuscaloosa? That'll be all. Everybody have a good day. And as always,
roll tide.